I wanna be a producer with a hit show on Broadway. I wanna be a producer.
Hello, everybody. Ken Davenport here. Welcome back to the Producer's Perspective podcast. This is week number 3 of Spring Awakening Month. We've already heard from director Michael Arden and book writer and lyricist Stephen Sater. And this week, I'm thrilled to have the composer of Spring Awakening himself, the maestro, Tony Award winner, Grammy Award winner, chart-topping Duncan Sheik. Welcome, Duncan.
Thank you so much.
Now, obviously, you had this hugely popular music career before Spring Awakening. So before we even get into the spring stuff, let's go way back. Mm-hmm. How did you get started writing music, playing music in the first place? Mm-hmm.
Well, to make a very long story very short, I started playing guitar when I was 5 years old. And my grandmother was a pretty fantastic pianist. She was born in Scotland, and she was this very dramatic, artistic woman, and she was very supportive of my various kind of musical endeavors. So I started playing guitar when I was 5, and there was always pianos in the house. So I was always banging on the piano in some kind of, aggressive and not very rigorous way, but I was always encouraged by her. And then kind of when I was 12, 13, 14, I started to get into the electronics and gear, so to speak. So I started playing with analog synthesizers and drum machines and guitar pedals and all that kind of stuff. So I actually was, as a pretty young kid, I was like using a lot of the technology. And I was a very unruly music student in terms of like sight reading and, playing other people's music. But I really had fun kind of creating my own stuff using the various kinds of technology that I could get my hands on, in the 80s, let's say.
And when did you write your first song?
Well, it's hard to say. Like I did also sing a lot as a young kid. And I was in musicals like when I was in grade school. So I was in Annie, and I was in The Muppet Show, and I did Barnum, and I did The Artful Dodger in Oliver when I was like 12. So I sang kind of up to that point. And then I think when my voice changed, I got incredibly self-conscious about my singing voice, and I stopped singing for probably 7 years or so. And I was just kind of making music, instrumental music and stuff. And then when I was really my freshman year in college, I was going to Brown. I had kind of, I bought a decent microphone, and I had a 4-track recorder, and I kind of in the secrecy of the recording studio at Brown, I started singing again, as a 19-year-old, and so I guess that was the first proper song I wrote was at 19, and actually that song. Again, very long story, but it made its way to a music publisher in LA, this guy named Dick Rudolph. And he really liked it, and he invited me out to Los Angeles to go talk about, getting a publishing deal together. So it was sort of like, first shot, best shot. and actually the deal didn't happen when I was 19, but it gave me the kind of impetus to say I should probably keep doing this.
And I'm sure it was a long story, but just in brief, how did it get there? Because so many people the only business I can think of that's harder than Broadway is actually the music business.
Yeah, it was nepotism. Dick's son was one of my classmates at Brown, and people actually know Dick's daughter really well. It's Maya Rudolph, who's been on Saturday Night Live. But anyway, Maya's dad, Dick Rudolph, he was a very big music publisher, and he was married to Minnie Riperton. So, I had written a song. Dick's son, who was my classmate, heard the song, and he was like, loved it, and he sent it to his dad and said, "Dad, you gotta sign this, my friend who's at school with me." So that was the beginning of that whole process.
At 19.
At 19. And then ultimately, again, totally nepotistic, but my other really good friend was Tracy Ross, who's Diana Ross's daughter. And when I finally did get signed to a proper label in Los Angeles, it was sort of through Diana Ross and her lawyer that I was able to do that. So there definitely is a little bit of a who you know factor in all of this, but the weird thing is I wasn't really making music that was similar to Diana Ross or Minnie Riperton in any way, but somehow it sort of worked out.
So you get signed and you release your first album. And how old were you when that debut album?
I was 26. 26, yeah. I made it when I was 25 and it came out when I was 26.
And then, boom, something very special happens. And Barely Breathing hits the charts. 55 weeks on the top 100 charts.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah. I mean, it was great, but my memory of that time is really, it's a lot about like being in a van with 4 other kind of, not very hygienic musician friends of my same age and staying in really horrible hotels. And like I was selling a lot of records and I had a song on the radio a lot and people were like, this is amazing. You're famous. You're rich. And I wasn't, it just, it didn't really work that way, and so it was a lot of cognitive dissonance, to be honest, of people like thinking you were much more successful than maybe you actually were. And I think that kind of fed into my discontent with the pop music world in general that kind of, sent me down this kind of crazy road where I ended up, writing music for theater.
When you wrote Barely Breathing, did you know, like, were you writing and be like, oh, this is great, this one's going to take off?
No, it was very much a case of I had written a set of songs that I was excited about, Atlantic was excited about, my producer Rupert Hine really liked, and this is a very kind of almost cliche music business story where at the end of the process, Ron Shapiro, the guy who was the head of Atlantic, who had really signed me, he was like, we need one more up-tempo song on the record. And I was sort of like rolling my eyes and going, ugh, okay. And I was, going through like some very typical 26-year-old relationship shenanigans. And so I wrote this very heart on my sleeve kind of song about this particular girl. And I felt that it was I always felt it was a little bit throwaway and not particularly that cool or that great, but it sort of worked. And I was like, okay, let's put it on the record. But then when we had recorded it, finally, all the kind of the business people, because we made the record in France and London, so all the Atlantic people from New York and the Warner Brothers people from London, they were all like, cha-ching. They were all saying like, oh, it's a hit, it's a hit, it's a hit. And I was like, okay, go with God. I don't know what to tell you. And weirdly, like this was the beginning of my kind of struggle with like being a pop artist versus being somebody who wants to write art songs in some way. Like I wasn't that interested in being on Top 40 radio. I was happy to take the checks. I was happy to get all the benefits of it. But I wanted to be Jeff Buckley or Bjork or Radiohead. Like those were the things that were inspiring to me. So it was odd to be on Top 40 radio at that particular moment because I didn't feel a lot of kinship with a lot of those other artists.
So last I heard, Radiohead has not written a musical. So, although there was something with Jeff Buckley songs a couple years ago. Is, yeah. So how did you go from wanting to be Radiohead in that world to transitioning to writing for musical theater?
Well, in fact, Tom York has written the music for the Roundabouts Pinter play that's going up this season.
Okay.
So actually, he's biting my stee.
I love it.
No, so I'll get back to that story. So around 1999, I had finished my second album cycle, and I was very disillusioned at that point, where I was just like, it was that was the moment of Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera and Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. And no offense to any of those artists or their fans, but it just had nothing to do with the music that I was into. And I just felt like, what am I going to do? And I'm a practicing Buddhist and have been since 1989. And I happened to meet another Buddhist, this guy Stephen Sater, who is a playwright, and at the time was also in a way like a I guess, a struggling playwright. You could say he had some successes, but he was, trying to get his next thing going. And again, very long story, very short. He handed me a copy of maybe the Ted Hughes translation of Spring Awakening, and he said, read this play, and maybe we should try and adapt it as a musical.
And when you read it, did you go, oh yeah, this is all me, I got this?
Well, I was not at that moment. I feel bad about it because I've told the story 9 million times, but I was not particularly a fan of musical theater in 1999. Even things like Rent, which I know was like nominally like a rock musical, it just, to me, it was like, this is musical theater dressed up in rock clothing, and it's not really for me. But when I read the play, I thought, well, there is something cool here, and it's a weird play, and it is sort of, it's expressionistic, and it's absurdist, and it's racy, and it's very kind of cutting, and it's a rebuke of late 19th century German society and the hypocrisy and the ridiculousness of their belief systems and their behavior, and especially the behavior of parents and teachers and clergy towards the kids that they interacted with. And so that aspect of it, that kind of like punk rock aspect of it, for lack of a better word, that appealed to me very much. And that I thought, well, if it's okay that I write music that stylistically is interesting to me and has nothing to do with what's going on in the rest of the musical theater right now, then let's do it. So that was my answer to him. And Stephen was cool. He was good about it. And very quickly, Michael Mayer came on board, and I have to say Michael Mayer was great about it. And he's the biggest musical theater aficionado of them all. But he was very much in support of it having a totally modern sound. So that was great.
It's certainly, I remember seeing it for the first time and thinking, I have never heard music like this on a Broadway stage before. What was the first song you wrote for it? Do you remember?
There was 4. I Believe was one of them. Mama Who Bore Me was one of them. I think Mirror Blue Night might have been one of them. And there was one other song that was called Comet on Its Way, which is a metaphor you can probably figure out if you want, that was since cut from the show, but it's a pretty good song.
Ooh. Any tracks of it anywhere?
It exists somewhere. Steven probably has it. Yeah.
I'll have to hit him up for a bootleg.
Yes.
So in the last 20 years, a lot of artists from the quote-unquote pop world have tried to come over, and you're one of the very few that have actually pulled it off successfully. Why do you think that is?
Well, look, again, I think a combination of like naivete and bravado and kind of, obnoxious self-righteousness in some way, I think is really what made it work. And also just being lucky to have the right set of collaborators during that process of me learning how to play well with others. I didn't go to college and study musical theater composition. Like, I didn't even know what those rules were to begin with. So it wasn't like I was trying to break the rules. I just didn't know what they were. I just wanted to write, like, really good songs, and I wanted to help tell the story, but I wasn't interested. To me, I don't care that the songs forward the action of the story or the plot. I didn't come from that world, so that was never, for me, it was just like, can I hear a really great song that emotionally moves me and gets me more kind of attached to this character and understand this character more. So, that was sort of the naivete part. And then also it was just my doggedness of saying, no, like please, the drums should not be mic'd this way. The guitars should not sound this way. The synthesizers can't be cheesy fucking synthesizers from the 80s. You need to be aesthetically rigorous about this stuff so that it makes sense to an audience of teenagers and 20-somethings and 30-somethings. And it's not just music that, it's just kind of like, okay, it's rock music, in parentheses. I've forced, myself and everybody else to be really strict about that stuff. And I think that that did have a good effect on the show overall. It was hard, but it was really hard to do that. There were many battles fought.
Do you think Broadway as a whole has gotten better at this?
Very, very, very much better. And I can point to a ton of things, but, specifically once where it was like, I loved the movie and they did a really respectful job of turning that into a show that respected the aesthetics of what those songs really are meant to be. And obviously Hamilton has been this huge juggernaut, and it's just a very smart thing that Lin has done, where he's found a way. Again, it's almost like the opposite thing of what I did, where he's found a way of using the kind of hip hop vernacular to have dialogue in the music where it doesn't sound cheesy and stupid, and that's completely genius. So I was talking to another producer recently, and they said it's clear, like, the audiences out there, they do not want the bog standard musical anymore. They want really interesting, cool, different things now. So whether it's Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime or Let the Right One In at St. Anne's, that, again, these are plays, but they're really, like, very progressive, very different ways of doing theater and telling stories, and also with really, really cool scores. To me, theater has become this very exciting medium.
Yeah, we're definitely outgrowing the Rodgers and Hammerstein, Arthur Miller, Fourth Wall.
Yeah, and I love. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love. Stephen and I, one of the first shows we went to when we decided to do Spring Awakening was Porgy and Bess at Lincoln Center, and I think we got a lot out of that. So I'm not disrespecting the past at all. It's just you do need to always be moving things forward, and if you move things forward, then you're going to create new audiences, and I think that's what Lin has done amazingly well, and certainly Stephen and I are trying to do, and we've got to fight the good fight for the theater.
So here you were, this writer from the age of 5 and 12 and 19 in a studio, Brown, all by yourself and writing songs, and then all of a sudden you're writing with someone else, a story and a lyricist. Now, was that mind-blowing? Was that difficult?
It was weirdly very easy. I always found writing lyrics to be the more painstaking part of the process. So having somebody kind of just, hand me a lyric and give me a context for that lyric was a huge leg up in a way. It was like, immediately you've got all this information to play with. And in Stephen's case, it happened to be really beautifully written and eccentric, but awesome kind of information to play with, and enigmatic and odd, and all the things that are, that can be inspiring as a composer. So it was great to kind of have lyrics and not have to, because when I write music for myself, I always write music first, and I kind of graft the lyrics onto the music, and that could often be just like really not fun, in the sense that I wasn't often clear what I wanted to say. It was very inchoate, and I was just sort of like, I like this vibe of the song, and this is a cool melody, and these are cool chords, and these are cool sounds, but I wasn't always so clear about specifically what I wanted to say. Certainly when I was making records as a 26-year-old. But having somebody whose life is words, who literally just is in love with words and the relationship of words and the sound of words, having somebody like that to work with was a real gift.
So it took you guys a while to write it?
Yes. We wrote a few songs. Michael Mayer came on board very quickly, and we had a first workshop at La Jolla in 99, 2000. And I think at that time, by the time we finished La Jolla, we had maybe 10 songs, which was like sort of half of the show. And then the next year, we were able to go to Sundance in 2000. At that point, we probably finished the first full draft. So we had like version 1 of the show was kind of 2 years into it. So that's pretty normal, I suppose. And at that point, then the Roundabout got involved, and they gave us a couple workshops. And so we did 2 workshops in New York that were pretty fancy, blown-out workshops, and we had Michael Cerveris, and we had all kinds of cool people involved, and it seemed like it was really going to happen, and then it didn't happen. It fell apart, as these things sometimes do. I remember getting a phone call from Stephen. Maybe this was like 2003, 2004. He was just like, "Well, the Roundabout has said that they're not going to do the show." And so at that point, we were like, it was 5 years of work that was just okay. We're done. I didn't know what to say. I was, off trying to make my next record. At that point, it was probably my 5th record, White Limousine. So I was like, all right, well, I'm not sure what to say. And then Tom Hulse kind of came around. I think, Michael Mayer got Tom Hulse to kind of come around, and Tom kind of came in and said, why don't we do a concert version of this at Lincoln Center? So that was like 2005. We had like a one-night only concert version we did there. It was like the American Songbook series. And we played that one show, and at that show, Neil Pepe and Ira Pittleman were there. And at the end of it, I think Ira and Neil shook hands, and we had our spot at the Atlantic.
So from the Sundance production to the eventual Broadway production, how much of it changed? Just to give us an idea of the rewriting process in those number of years.
Yeah, I think probably 70% of the songs were there in Sundance. If I think about it, Mama Who Bore Me was there, Touch Me was there, let me go through it. I Believe was certainly there. Let's see, kind of going through it. Purple Summer was certainly there. There were a lot of the big songs were there from the beginning, but many things got written. I think many things got written kind of around the time between, let's say, Lincoln Center and Broadway. Many things did get written. So I don't know, maybe it's like 50% existed and 50% was developed over that kind of 2 years. It's a little bit of a blur. And some of these things, they evolve and they change and they kind of go through different permutations. So it's hard to specifically remember which songs got written when. And Stephen rewrites like crazy. And Michael would demand a lot of rewriting. So, it was a ton of work, but it eventually became really fun to do.
And when the curtain rose metaphorically on the Atlantic production, I'll ask you the same question I did about Barely Breathing.
Sure.
Were you, or not even on the opening night, so there was no audience, the dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
Were you like, oh shit, we crushed this. This is going to be good.
Well, no, so let me back up 1 second. I will say that there were like a couple moments in the development process where like we would do a workshop presentation and I would shake my head and I would say, oh my God, this is awful. Like, this is so god awful and so bad. Really, what have I gotten myself into? So there were many of those moments. But I will say, at the Atlantic, it was like the first day they got in costume, and we had Christine Jones' sets were up, and then they did the Bitch of Living like with the full band, and I don't know whether it was Sitzprobe or whatever it was, but it was like the first day you saw the whole thing kind of put together. But it was maybe before Tech. It was right before Tech. And they did the Bitch of Living with Bill T's choreography. And that's when I did, like, Steve and I went like, we had elbowed each other and said, holy shit, like, this could really work. But that was the first moment. It really was like after 5 years of working on it where I finally felt like, oh yeah, this is what this is supposed to be.
So those moments where you thought it was god-awful, I have them all the time. I go through this, every show I've ever done, I go through this, I hate my show day, I love my show, I hate my show. But how do you get through I hate this?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Look, this was my first rodeo, so I didn't know how to deal with that feeling. Now, I've developed many other musicals, and now I sort of know how to kind of manage my emotional responses. But at the time I didn't, and I would just be like, oh, this was a complete waste of my time. But I think there was something inside both Stephen and myself where we kind of harbored this hope that there was a real kernel of something there that would really affect people. And we held on to that. I think when Stephen was super down, I think I was sort of like, look, let's, we'll keep working on it. And when I was just like, oh, this is terrible, Stephen would say, no, there's something really great here. So we sort of propped each other up.
Well, thank goodness you did, because obviously the results were unbelievably extraordinary, not just in terms of its quote-unquote success and awards, but you moved a lot of people and changed a lot of lives and changed the face of musical theater for sure. And now here it is back again.
Yeah.
Did you ever think it would come back so quickly?
Definitely not. When I saw the show in downtown Los Angeles, a little over a year ago, I thought it was amazing. I loved it. I was a big fan of it from right off the bat, but nowhere in my mind did I think, oh, we're headed to Broadway at all. But I thought like, oh, this is an incredible version of the show, and I didn't expect to be as moved as I was. And, I don't want to reiterate all of the stuff that we've said about the ASL aspect of it, but that was just I'll just say it once, it was a hugely, surprisingly beautiful revelation to have that layer in the show. So that happened, and then I think, Michael being Michael and, and the Deaf West producers, they had the opportunity to do it at the Annenberg, and I went and saw it there. And I have to say, it was a tough transition to that theater because it was like going to a real kind of proper regional theater space, and this was a show that was like in a black box with the upright piano moving around, and it was very kind of handmade, and then all of a sudden it was like in a proper space, and it was tricky, like during the previews, like there were major issues, but Michael got it together, and the cast and the musicians were always great, but it took a minute for the show to settle in there. But then when it did, it was like, oh, it revealed itself to really work even in a more kind of quote-unquote pro context.
In Beverly Hills.
In Beverly Hills, of all places, yeah. No, it's still, I think, by the time they sorted out the problems, it was like, oh, this thing is still really fantastic. And then, not to get too inside baseball, but once there was this idea that we were, coming to Broadway, I think they were also like, ooh, this is a great version of the show, but is it ready for Broadway? I think, a lot of us were asking that question.
I was too. I'll tell you a little secret. I said, yes, I want to move the show. And I was like, what did I just say?
But anyway, so, but I also knew, like, there was something incredibly special about this band and this set of actors. Like, I'm sort of attached to the band because I'm the composer, but also these actors. And so when it all worked out that we had this opportunity to come to Brooks Atkinson, I was in support of it right off the bat. I have to say, I was like, there's going to be challenges, and who knows what's going to happen, but could be amazing. Could be amazing. And in fact, and I take zero credit for this. Once we did get into that theater, and I saw I saw the first preview, it was just like Michael knocked it out of the park. The cast knocked it out of the park. I take zero credit for it, but it was just like, whoa, this thing is it's beyond my wildest dreams, good and affecting, and and the part of me was a little bit like, this is going to sound horrible, but part of me was like, oh, if I never do anything again, at least I've done this. It's like,
listen, I've said that myself to many people. It's just a very special thing that I'm very proud to have produced, for sure. But this is a busy year for you. So spring now, American Psycho this spring.
Yeah, February it'll start previews, I think, yeah.
And you're writing some more shows. You've got an album coming out. Mm-hmm. Do you switch hats between writing theater and pop music? Is there a switch, or you just, whatever comes out, comes out?
This year has been a lot of going back and forth just because I had to finish my record, Ledger Domain, and I'm going on tour in November, and I'm playing at Carnegie Hall at the end of November, so I kind of have to keep my eye on that ball too, more than usual. But it's been good. I mean, I I actually really like being able to move back and forth between the two worlds, and it kind of keeps me sane, and it gives me a good perspective. Like because you can kind of get wrapped up in musical theaterese in some way, and you can also get wrapped up in like pop music BS, and so the two things are like they're good correctives of one another in a certain way. So it's been nice to be able to do both.
Do you do spring songs in concerts? Do you do any musical theater?
Yeah, I mean, I've played Bitch of Living quite a bit and Touch Me a fair amount, and if I have a girl singing with me, we'll do Mama Who Bore Me, and sometimes I'll play shows. I played a show. Where was I? Somewhere in Northern California, and there were a bunch of kids who were like theater kids from the college, and they had done a production of Spring Awakening. And I said, does anybody here like know Touch Me? And I'll just a gaggle of kids will come on stage and we'll play the song in the show, which is great, which is really incredibly fun.
Cool.
Yeah. And so I'll do a little bit of that, but I don't overdo it.
So when you're touring, I took my wife to a Chris Young concert for our anniversary, and I just found it very interesting to sit back and watch a rock concert, country rock in that case. Mm-hmm. Anything that you think Broadway can learn from the touring rock world that you guys are doing much better than we do?
Well, I'll give you the converse, the obverse of that first. I think there's a lot that the rock world can kind of learn from Broadway, or certainly I've learned from Broadway, which is that there's an amazing thing of having a group of talented people who are handling costumes and choreography and lighting and movement, and in a rock concert you don't necessarily have narrative, but this idea that you have like really smart people who are helping you create like a show. I came from a rock world where it was just like 4 guys getting on stage with their instruments and playing it, and that's it. And if the music is good, then I think that's okay. But ultimately, it's not that compelling as a multimedia, event. So for me, coming into the musical theater, it was like amazing to have that ability to work with those kinds of people. I do think, I'm not going to name names, but to this day I go to musical theater shows, and I'm scratching my head as to, why, and this, gosh, I'm going to get myself in trouble. I don't want to get myself in trouble. But I do feel like when you go to a rock concert, there's a intensity and an immediacy to the sound, and there's a kind of a, the sound of the instruments is usually, hopefully, with the right kinds of rock bands, really luxurious and awesome and great, even if it's 4 musicians on stage. And I often, unfortunately go to musical theater where, everything just sounds so small and thin and not interesting. And I think maybe there's this sense that like, we need to hear every syllable of every lyric, because, this is the song, and there's this kind of like this weird inability to just be like muscular about how a musical is supposed to sound. And I shouldn't generalize, but I often feel like sound design is where you have like a really, really awesome people in the rock world, and it's been like pulling teeth, I think, to get some of the musical theater folks to make the shows sound the way that a younger audience is going to be psyched about it. And this may be, maybe generational, or maybe, I remember doing Whisper House in San Diego, and Dan Moises Schreier did our sound there, and he's amazing. And I pushed him to make it like pretty rocky and pretty intense. And there were audiences at the Old Globe. I heard them come out and they were like, it was so loud. I couldn't hear the singers, and they were like really, really upset about that, So I think there is a slightly kind of generational or, genre kind of bias that goes into that stuff. And that's been a tough battle to fight all the way along the way. But weirdly, coming back to Spring Awakening, this version of the show is a pretty acoustic sounding version of the show. It's almost more organic than the original in a way, and it really suits the show really well. So So I don't know. I think, this is not. I'm not giving very good advice, but I do think, theater producers and people who make theater should keep their eye on the ball of what the kinds of music that the people in the popular culture are listening to more than they currently do.
So, since you're on giving advice right now, I'm going to ask you to give some more, because I think you give very good advice. Normally, I would ask a writer like you, what's some advice you could give to all the writers out there? But I'm not going to ask that. I'm going to ask you to give advice to a very specific group.
Okay.
I want you to imagine you're at a support group for pop music writers, and you're giving a lecture to all of them because they want to write for the musical theater. What would you say to successful pop music writers on how they can transition to the world of musical theater? Because, as I often say, writing a 3-minute song is much different than writing a 3-hour musical.
Of course. Well, the big thing is collaboration and being able to work with people who you're excited about and where you can bounce ideas off of each other, and you need to learn to kind of play well with each other to, keep your eye on the ball of what the larger thing needs to be. So it's all about collaboration. It's, there are very, very few people who successfully do it all themselves. So that's one thing. But I think the other thing too is to be true to thine own self. Like, be true to the music that you're excited about. And just because you're, going from the world of pop music to writing for theater, it doesn't mean you need to kind of change the genre in which you write, or you need to slavishly write music that is within the normal construct of the musical theater canon. Just write great songs and have some smart people around you that can help those songs tell the story of this larger arc that hopefully your show will have. So it's like about being really collaborative, but also being really strict with yourself, that you're not just making bad aesthetic decisions for the sake of old school rules.
Okay, last question, which has now been called my infamous genie question. Okay. I want you to imagine that the genie from Aladdin comes to visit you and says, Duncan, you've done a great job, such a great job at being in both worlds and advancing musical theater and advancing pop music and back and forth. I want to grant you one wish. One wish. You cannot wish for other wishes. Don't try that. What's the one thing that drives you so crazy about Broadway? The thing that'll keep you up at night, that make you so mad. You're one of the nicest guys I've ever met, actually, especially for someone as successful as you are. You're just such a nice guy. What makes you fucking mad that you would ask this genie to change?
I think the musical theater is this amazing medium, and I'm like really honored to have been welcomed into this world, like as a kind of an outsider, and I love like my compatriots, and I can be sort of obnoxious about the way things sound, like they're not like rock enough, or they're not authentic enough, or they're kind of too fuddy-duddy, or they're too wussy. I can be really obnoxious about all that stuff, but I think that's my own subjectivity, and really like I need to probably just chill about that because it's not very productive. But what I do think is, and this, I don't need a genie to do this. I just think that like it's important to move the form forward always, and to be brave about the choices that you make, and to do things that are different and compelling, and they're not rule bound, but that clearly are going to move an audience. So, when the shows that I've seen this past couple of years that I've been really excited about, which I've mentioned, whether it's Curious Incident or Let the Right One In, or, any of these things, they've all done things in a very, very different, fresh way. And I think that's the key to all of this, is you got to keep the form moving forward. And we have a healthy business, actually, I think, right? And it's amazing in a world where the music business has halved itself, and the movie business is like terrified of what's going to happen because of digital distribution. But we have a business that's like about live entertainment, and you can't turn that into zeros and ones. And so I think we're very lucky to have this amazing medium that will hopefully always exist because it's built on this interaction of a live audience and an amazing set of actors and creators. So the key is to make sure it doesn't get hidebound and keep moving it forward and doing cool shit.
I love that answer. You don't need a genie. You can push the boundaries yourself.
That's it, yes.
We all can do that. Well, listen, I want to thank you for your time and thank you for pushing the boundaries of musical theater. We are all better off for it, and for the fact that you were feeling disassociated with the pop music world with four guys in a van. Thank God for that, and thank God they were not hygienic.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks to all of you for listening. Next week, Spring Awakening Month continues. Our brilliant choreographer, Spencer Liff, will join us. You can learn how the movement and the ASL were integrated when you tune in next week. Thanks so much.